begin this particular introduction to strength-based practices. And before I begin, I wanted to thank all my students, professional colleagues in Victoria, New South Wales, in Queensland, and well, some of them even from other parts of the world. The strength-based practices, what probably I might do is make this into a slightly, this would be the best way to present, I think. Where do I hit the presentation mode? Are you able to see the first slide? Yeah, you are able to see the first slide. And okay. Okay, the whole idea of strength-based practices is about how to look at some of the clients that we have got, whether they are in the field of mental health, whether they are in the field of community development, or perhaps with people with disabilities, people who are in distress as a result of their connection or their involvement in child protection, in the child protection department. All those areas basically come into our into this particular context. So what I plan to do is share a few slides, and as I move on, explain away my concepts. I think in about 2012 or so, I started off talking about it in a much larger audiences in Australia and other places. But I started with strength-based practices the first time in 2006. And it all started with an international gathering that we brought out at that point of time. And when we talk about strengths of people, we are talking about the ability of individuals which means intellectual skills and capacities. And also we are talking about the physical skills and capacities, and also the interpersonal strengths that we normally talk about. Now, where do we find these strengths? These strengths, normally, we find them in family, extended family and friends, colleagues, neighbors, networks, community, cultures, customs, traditions, and a whole heap of things. So how do we figure them out? How do we utilize them? And what do we call these things? We call them resources in the environment. So which is basically, it's beyond us as specialists and beyond us as the counselors that we are looking at utilizing some of these things and try and see what we could possibly do. In addition to that, we also have material resources, physical objects, and things like that we would think about. So when we look at clients, or when we look at their families, each family, each client that we talk about also has some ideas as to what they are looking forward to. Everybody has an aspiration. Everybody thinks about something for the future, a hope, a dream. They all have interests and concerns. And of course, they also have a lot of things that they value and they talk about them. Now, one of the things that happens is because of the interactions that we have with our clients is at the stage where clients are seeking something, immediately a service, there's a tendency for us to look at a bag of goodies that we have got and to see whether this service matches with the client's need and move on. So in those circumstances, we seem to be not thinking in terms of what else can happen with the client and what is it that the individual is looking at and what sorts of aspirations, what sorts of hopes and what sorts of dreams that individual might have. So what the premise of strength-based practices is that all people have strengths and capacities, that people can change, but they need to, of course, think in terms of the change themselves. People change and grow through their strengths and capacities, and people are experts on their own situation. Now, that sometimes challenges a lot of people. If people are experts, what are we then? Certainly, we are experts. We have studied, we've taken education. As a result of that, we reflect. We have a few more clients that we have seen. We have a comparative basis from one client to the other. Certain things that worked in Mumbai or Bombay might even work in Papua New Guinea or somewhere. Things that work in Melbourne might even work in Brisbane. Let's take COVID-19. Lots of these things can work from one place to the other. But at the same time, to think that a client knows and has the expertise within himself is again a different cup of tea. In other words, what we are suggesting is client knows where it is pinching and how he could possibly, what could be a solution for him. Somebody who's homeless might probably be suggesting having a home would be a good thing. There could be a whole lot of other people who are homeless, but they're adamant, they do not wish to go, and you might see for those homeless people, finding a home would be something that is necessary. So there are sometimes clients who might be able to perceive what their need is, and there are some clients who may not want to go in that particular direction. So all homeless are not necessarily looking for a home, just as some homeless are protesters. They would like to stay where they are. You might want to improve their condition, but they do not wish to take up that particular condition that you wish to improve. So which means there's an opportunity there for you to actually ask them and indulge with them in such a way that what exactly is stopping them from looking at home itself as an alternative. So that's the way we would be looking at. So the next notions that we will be bringing about in our belief system is the problem is the problem. The person is not the problem. That's an important and a unique contribution of the belief of strength-based practices. When we say that, that is because of the next line which comes up. Problems can blind people from noticing their strengths. So you know that you have dealt with something before, but somehow at this point of time, you may not know how to deal with it because the problem is so overwhelming that it has taken control of you. When people start appreciating their strengths, they are basically free to learn. So what are we basing this on? We're basing this on our philosophy that we consider people to be experts in a way, to an extent. Each person is, of course, unique. People make sense of experience in their own way. People's strengths and capacities, aspirations, experiences, and beliefs are within themselves. And of course, people know best what helps them change and what actually stops them. That's an interesting thing. They know it, yet they don't have a control over. So that's what we will probably be looking at. Nobody can really know how people feel except themselves. When we say, yeah, I understand your problem, the client sometimes might come back to us and say, no, you don't. You're not in my shoes. So that itself it should ring as an alarm bell. Yes, we are not in his shoes. So what's happening then is we are looking forward to understand him. So the sentence, of course, we will change and say, I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to see what could possibly occur in our situation. So that is the way we would go. People know best why they do what they do. That's again an interesting phenomenon. So how are we working? Generally speaking, it is said that people who are in power, some of us are in power, whether we are part of the government, whether we are part of any institution, in a non-governmental organization, an expert in the field, we assume certain amount of power. So with that power, how is our transaction? How is it coming up? Is it a triangle which is falling down? It's from top down. Assume the right to control others. You negate and limit the rights of the resources. Participation and self-determination of the client is removed. We set agenda and expect compliance from groups and individuals. We expect people to behave in a particular way. So that's one of those things which comes up, which we need to probably think. And the only reason why we think about compliance from clients is because they have the problem. Do we comply? Yes, we do to most of the extent. And maybe that is because we may not have exactly the same problem. So the power over somebody rests on the view that our way is the best. We know what's best for others. I think it assumes a position of superiority. This doesn't come, it could be natural to some people, but it could also be intentional or maybe unintentional. How does that come to us? Because we have expertise, we have the answers, we have the resources, we know how the templates can be filled up, whether there's an NDIS template or a mental health template. We know how the tests can be done. We know what the problem is. And of course, we also know what the solution is and how to reach it. So we just pick it up from the bag of goodies and give it away. Know why things are the way they are. That is also something that we seem to be knowing. How do we know that? We assume that on the basis of our previous research, on the basis of previous evidence. Surely you can do that. We talk about in our allied health frameworks, there's an evidence-based framework. We're not ignoring that. Strength-based practice does not ignore evidence-based frameworks or critical reflection on the past activities. But it does say, before we move on, we probably need to try and see why things are the way they are and what people's strengths and capacities are. That is something that we probably need to be looking at. So most experts, the way we seem to be working is, when I use the word violence or coercion, people may not agree. But it does come to a level or a degree of violence when we just brush the client away or tell the client, this is it and this is to be done. When does that happen and in which departments it happens? Certainly it comes out very, very clearly in statutory departments, the ones which are connected with legalities, the ones which are admonishing somebody, the ones which are administering certain problems, voluntary, involuntary client, all of that involves a certain amount of coercion, expectation of behaviors, and certainly a level of violence. Now, my entire my discourse today would be to minimize that violent activity that might occur. The other thing, of course, is we're not listening. We talk about and we yogalize the word called active listening. We try to listen actively. But what happens is while we are listening actively, we seem to also start working on a parallel thinking. I know what you require. Assuming to know what's best for others automatically comes. That generally shows that we are not probably that considerate. Telling people what's wrong with them. We often do that. Something is wrong with you today. It starts with a very innocent gesture to a friend, even in our conversation, a mother's conversation to a child, a brother's conversation to a sister. What's wrong with you? Before asking that question, probably we need to think twice as to where would that question put that individual for that moment. Does it touch the self-esteem of that particular person? Does it actually put that person in a defensive? We need to think about it. So every way we need to be thinking in terms of how we talk, telling people what to do and how to do it. Certainly, if you are a school teacher in the early stages, there is a way, and that is the only way. But what probably would happen also is there's an encouraging way. Oh, that's good, what you've done. Maybe these yellow lines that you've fixed could probably move from the center to the periphery. So in other words, maybe, maybe not are those kind of words which help an individual to ensure that the other person's creativity is not completely derailed or taken away. What else happens with us? There is unfortunately a level of blaming. There is the whole thing about the DSM-4 and us being a part of the entire, the mental health hierarchy. There are, of course, many, many questions that people ask. Labeling, classifying people, excluding people, limiting their participation. On various ways, various counts. We know with the disability issues that prior to deinstitutionalization, most of the people in this country were all part and parcel of institutionalization and being taken care of, nursing, mothering, and constantly pushing them, come here, go there, breakfast time, all of that. Now, the resources dwindled, we moved away. Not only resources dwindled, but also civilized procedures started coming. The more education came, more awareness came around that isn't a way to look after people with disabilities. We started looking at philosophies that came about, least restrictive alternatives. We started looking at philosophies such as social role valorization, person-centered philosophies. Once we started looking at that, our labeling, classifying of people, excluding them, limiting their participation, giving unsolicited advice, telling people what they are good at and what they are not, perhaps, imposing our views, planning strategies for change for them, all of that seems to have slightly taken a second route, or we have just kind of minimized that. So what is the next approach that we've got? The other approach as practitioners seems to be we pathologize people. We define what is it, what is not possible for people. We seem to be acting as agents of social control. We create passive dependence. Sometimes we blame the very people that we are serving for their failure because they haven't cooperated with us. So and we start framing them as resistant, uncooperative, and when things don't work out. So that's an important area. So when do you see a client will change? Remember, a client changes when he feels happy, he feels safe, he feels valued, he feels confident. It's important that through the listening that we talk about, we prize ourselves with, whether we are social workers or psychologists, we talk about we are all active listeners and reflectors. Are we assuring our clients that they are feeling well, They are validated. Is there a sense of hope, a picture of the future? Is there sufficient motivation? Oh, somebody says they are not able to see my slides. I've just seen that. Let me. I hope this will clear that. Okay. So feeling safe and valued, confident, and feeling heard and validated, sufficient motivation, sufficient resources. These are very, very important. And as we see, the conditions for change also involve an appreciation and the ability to mobilize the strengths of our clients. If the client knows what to do and how to do it, start seeing that he is kind of full participant in what we are expecting him to do, connects with others, has the opportunity to connect, automatically we would be expecting the client to start working with us. So what are the conditions for power with? Acknowledgement of power imbalances and action to address them. Respect for people's dignity and rights. Respect for the dignity, for the rights to self-determination. And valuing what we have in common. Creation of interdependence in the community. This seems to be the important areas for us to be thinking about. And when we look at the conditions with power with, we look at uniqueness and diversity, a possibility of respectful communication, collaboration and consultation, and of course, open information flow and transparency. Now, opposed to this, let me open up what is called the deficit cycle. The whole idea is that most of our clients, when they have some difficulty, an area, we're starting at the bottom, that where change is required, they seem to be focusing on the deficits because they are not basically looking at the ways to get it going. That generates some negative expectations. Most opportunities they don't see, so they look to them as if they are blocked. And such negative experiences makes their expectations lower and forces negative behavior, goes back to focus on deficits, and nothing seems to change as far as they are concerned. Same thing, convert that into a competency cycle. There's an issue, we start with the top, a concern, an issue, a niggle, a problem. When the problem, of course, is there, we look at, okay, what are the other strengths that an individual has? Build up some positive expectations, provide some opportunities, provide some valued experiences, and focus on continuing development of competencies so that should those issues come back again, he or she is in a position to move and collect those strengths and start working. Some people ask me this question, strength-based practice, solution-focused practice, there are many, many practices which all seem to have gotten mixed up. Now, it's not a question of mixed up. There are a number of practices which can be combined to be spoken of as strength-based practices. One of them, of course, would be the solution-focused practice that we could look at. So when in solution-focused practice, what we tend to do is identify what needs to be different. So we know there's a problem. We identify the strengths. We start looking at hope, how to develop that. There are some steps that we plan, and we look forward for some change to occur. So solution practice, focused practice, is concerned with how solutions work rather than how problems work. So in other words, knowing what will be different when the problem is absent is more important than understanding the causes. So it's like this. Somebody comes to you, probably in the simplest way would be, look, tomorrow, if this problem was to disappear, in other words, tonight you slept and the problem disappeared, what would that look like to you? One could easily say it's absence of the problem. But the other way of looking at it is, it looks like a bright morning. There is hope for me. There is some way by which I could do this and I could do that. So that is the conversation that you're starting off with, and you're hoping to go backwards. It's not that you don't consider the problem. It's not that you don't work with the deficits, but what you work with starts with the future rather than going backwards and fixing the deficits. Because the approach to deficits in this fashion is what does it require for you to acquire those strengths in order to get that particular activity done. You remember in the earlier stages we said there are things which are beyond you. How do you use them? There are resources beyond you. How do you use them? How do you get them? And that is the approach that we take as far as the practice is concerned. It's more useful to focus on what people are doing when the problem is absent or less of a problem than what people are doing wrong when it is present. Of course, problems also have exceptions that expose strengths and give clues to solutions. COVID-19 throughout the states, in various capital cities, some people have done something different. And they did that as a result of their creativity, their ingenuity, and their thinking itself. So those are the kind of exceptions that we possibly can look at. So how do you practice strength-based practice? In anything that you do, what we need to do is, this slide will come up a couple of times, listening to people's stories and identifying the core issues in them, developing a picture of the future, identifying the strengths and exceptions, identifying if there are any additional resources around, mobilizing their strength and resources through a plan of action, and renewing and evaluating. So that's the same thing. That is people's strengths and capacities identified. They have their own resources. There will be community resources. There are specialist resources. That is the agencies like yours, agencies and social workers, psychologists, physiotherapists, all those people, we call them specialists. They come into the picture and then the solutions start. So what is this based on? It's about justice. It's a just practice. It's about transparency in a way. It's about being honest with our clients, what we can do, what we can't do. It's about self-determination. It's sharing the power that we have got. It's regard for human rights. It's inclusion and participation, collaborating with them, and partnership, and sharing the resources, strength, knowledge, information, ideas, and ensuring that the client is involved in their own decision making. In some of you who work in disability sector, and have visited homes of the clients that we have got, where there are carers as well. And if you've got clients who don't speak a language, they're nonverbal, and on their refrigerators and in their rooms, you might find, some boards and signals, signs. What are they for? Breakfast time, lunch time, dinner time. So a speech pathologist has gone in there, worked out along with OT, or possibly any other person, to identify through a photo type of a language what we call augmentative communication systems, where a symbol of something, a burger, for instance, gives an individual an understanding, yeah, we are going out for a burger, that's an outing. A garden photograph, that is to show an individual that we are basically going out for a walk. So we do those things in such a way we are in a position to help them make those decisions. It's not, in the past, there used to be philosophy that we need to make decisions for people who are in situations of disability. But nowadays, the last 10 years or so, we've been working with them in order to increase their decision-making capacity and to actually impress upon ourselves that they are also capable of ensuring that a few things can be improved with their help. So identification and mobilization of strengths, exploring and describing their aspirations, adding resources to complement people's strengths and aspirations, and self-determination and overcoming constraints. That's the most important thing. What I would be doing now is basically go through an example of a community, what has happened in the community, what was the picture of the community in the beginning, what is the picture of the community that they envisioned. In other words, what is the community that they dreamt about, and how did the community shape itself? And I know that a community example can, in your own way, be fitted to a group, to fitted to an organization, and a part of it can also be explained towards an individual. I take a couple of days to actually organize this training, and what we are trying to do is just a 1.5 hour understanding. And if it is a sector-based training, then obviously it takes about a day and a half for us to get through. But let's see how best we can understand this one particular examples. So one of the things which we've already talked about earlier is strength-based listening. This slide, as I told you, comes back again. This is the second time it's come. People have their stories and people have their experiences. People have aspirations, people have dreams and goals. When you use the word people, it's just clients. You do not need to say, there's a client with mental health, there's a client with so-and-so. It's just people, they are people. Yes, they're different to us, and that's why they are our clients. So let the client word be part of your, maybe part of your service, but otherwise recognizing them as people will automatically change your prescription, your perspective, and the manner in which you will be actually dealing with them. Because then you start recognizing that these are people with strengths and capacities, and they have a future, and they have a story to tell. So one example of the community. The council seems to have planted trees in the street, and within a week, a row of one street has been snapped off at the bottom. A lot of trees have been taken away. The local store was there, and that was closed 3 months ago. The new people who tried to reopen it, they were a gay couple. Let's assume this is a rural area. And unfortunately, there are some difficulties out there. So the gay couple, they developed a coffee shop. with the outdoor seating. Now they are leaving because the shop has been vandalized, and their flat, which is at the back of the shop, which was stoned on numerous occasions. The police have done nothing, even though a few of us got together to make a delegation. Now, what could police do? Their police also have certain limitations, and if it's only a level of vandalism and they can't catch them, obviously they leave it at that point of time. Further story in the same village. Last year, the local priest stopped coming to do the services, means the church services. Now they start sending a church leader. He visits on a weekly basis and does some kind of study circle. And people don't see that it looks the same, anymore. There was a woolen mill there that closed 2 years ago. So many workers went out of work. It had a bad effect on things here in this particular village. Some houses are vacant and they've been taken over by squatters. This doesn't happen in Australia probably, but somewhere, this case study is from somewhere. The local employment training program gets some young people involved, but a lot of them are interested in computers. So this is an older story. The TAFE college is impossible for people to get into. It's so far from this particular area. Over at the community house, all they seem to do is run social functions. So one lady who narrates this to you will tell you, what hope have we got for this community? Now, so how do we develop this? So the way we work with this is we develop a vision of what they want it to be like. We are thinking about the future. We're not talking about the deficit. We're not talking about the problem. A description of what will be happening when the issues are resolved is more important for us than what is happening right now. So what are the two interrelated processes that we are going to do? One, we explore the values, we look at the future possibilities, and we look at the ways of being, that is aspirations, hopes, and dreams. So we develop specific description of what people will be doing and what will be happening when the problem no longer exists. So that's the picture. So let's go to the picture. The picture is, wow, people want to feel proud of the community and hopeful. They want our streets to be beautifully lined and trees. They want to see the church is working with the council and the local community to redevelop the area. They want to see a cooperative is operating and the houses have been renovated for low-cost accommodation. They want to see that the local shop serves coffee and cake on the deck and opens at night even to serve affordable meals. Beautiful idea. People gather there at any time of the day to enjoy each other's company. The police come to play sport rather than, worry about vandals with the young people once a week, and community group is formed to stop vandalism with support from the police. In Australia, we've got these police and citizen and youth associations. So making that function a little better. The mills are being used by people to develop skills and hobbies, and young people have a sense of purpose. Employment training is run there, and the TAFE college and a local business run computer training, and some of the older people are also helping out. The study circle, church has not returned. The study circle has expanded, and people have joined that we didn't expect. It discusses the community's potential and things that can be done to make a difference, and takes action to help many people, make people feel secure and have met. Okay. So the next question is, how did we arrive at? These are the questions to find the strengths of the community. What do you do well? What are your skills and interests? What was happening before these difficulties arose? What were things better than they are now? When were things better than they are now? When are things not as bad? What's happening then? Are there times when the problem isn't there? What's different then? What are you doing differently at that point of time? What do others consider as your strengths? Have you ever beaten any problems before in your lives? Have you met challenges before? How did you go about doing that? How would you be feeling if these issues are not there in your life? What would you be doing that would help you to feel this way? What do you want to be happening instead? How would that make a difference? If there was a miracle and things were different, what would you be doing? If you could just change one thing, not too many, what would that be? So these questions are pointed. They're good for individual. They're good for the community. They're even good for a group. Now, change does not happen unless the people who are involved in the change notice that. People need to be told to appreciate their, people appreciate their efforts. People become aware of their power to make the difference. Confidence and self-esteem does increase. And change, of course, over a period of time becomes sustainable. What else happens? People learn problem-solving skills. They start giving clues and ideas about what to do. So Stent's approach then to people is dependent upon positive attitude about people's dignity, their capacity, their rights, and uniqueness and commonality. So when we started off earlier, we said people know what to do. People know what solutions they have for each of the problems. This is now an extension on that. People are their own agents of change. They can create conditions that enable them to control and direct the process of change and therefore direct their future. So what strength approach does is creates conditions that enable people to identify value and mobilize their strengths and capacities in the process. So we as workers complement the existing strength of the people, the resources, as opposed to compensating for their deficits. True, there are certain things that you need to do. Somebody is in need of a wheelchair, of course, you won't ask him, go buy it. If it's available somewhere, you'll go get that. If it is part of a privilege, you'll provide that. You won't ask him, construct a wheelchair by yourself. So there are certain things that we do, certain provisions that we operate, but there are certain things that we would help the client themselves to do. So basically, there are a couple of references which are there here. And both of these references are free. The 2012 one is a whole book that you can actually download and take that away. I suspect this is recorded. So what I might do is send it off as a record. And I'll also send you the PowerPoint that I've used because some of you have kind of missed on the slides. You use them. If you wish, you can even write to me at some point of time for any clarification that you would want. And those are the details. So what I would do is I'll stop the share at this particular level and basically take a few questions that we can do because some people want to leave by 10, but I've got this opportunity to go on till about 10:30. And I can now face you guys and definitely take on some of your questions and also answer them at this point of time. Anyone who wishes to begin, I mean, it can be, one of our senior professionals, it could be a student, it could be anyone that is able to take it up at this point of time. Sure. I guess I got carried away. I didn't see that the slides were not moving, but it's good. At least somewhere I managed to see them. Yes, anyone? Any particular question from the field?
I maybe have a high concept one that in practice would always be a nuanced thing, but we're discussing at a theoretical level, so I feel like it's still appropriate.
Sure.
A lot of the context we were discussing using strengths-based practice in terms of situations with offenders or with people under guardianship orders or with people where there are quite strong structural limitations on their behavior and even to a certain extent a moral limitation on behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any specific thoughts around, like, if okay, here's maybe a slightly more concrete example.
Mm-hmm.
I read a think piece the other day on an offender group from the 80s with, at the time as they were called, batterers.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about specifically men committing domestic violence.
Yep.
And in the men, the person who was working with these men wasn't making any traction until he actually started to unpack the benefits that the men were receiving from engaging in violent behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And in a situation like that, where someone considers their own behavior already like what am I trying to say? Like already beneficial to them, like that they feel like the status quo, even though it's harmful for other people, is beneficial for them.
Sure.
Is there an application of strengths and solution-based therapy there, or
sure.
Is there a risk of condoning intolerant behavior? Yeah.
Okay. One of the things which is one of the most important thing that you probably need to understand with strength-based practices is clients that you are talking about who have got into a habit of becoming who they are and constantly involved in things like that. What we expect is you need to. Someone is having a little bit of trouble out there. Okay, what is important is it's like you must have heard when in your life that when you take a horse to the pond, you have taken a horse to the pond. You would not probably have made her drink that water from the pond at that point of time unless it is thirsty. So the important thing for you to understand is create the thirst in that particular person. So in other words, you got to get to the level of awareness that what is happening is a consequence of some behavior of the past. And you need to get to that. So one defect to the other, to the other, you will of course go towards the past and check through some of those things. But as you said, if they are involuntary and they are in habitual kind of situations and they are constantly lulling themselves and living in that kind of it's not a fool's paradise. It's working for them. Someone who is in addiction, it works for him. But at some point of time, if the principle on which you are trying to work with a person who is addicted is to get him out of addiction, that principle is good for you. But what you need to see is that principle, how do you plant that principle in that individual and make him see that we would need to, that the client would need to move out of that. So you need to work a little more on those ideas as to what is best interest of the client should also become the best interest of the client felt by him. So
if I can just reflect
yes.
to check my understanding.
Yes.
So there's this sense of exploring not just how that behavior might be working now, but whether it would work into the future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
And what happens.
And what happens and what long-term effects could be. And sort of almost developing a problem within that behavior.
One is developing the problem, which is if you were to think in terms of developing a problem, what happens is that you are going towards a doomsday kind of a strength-based practice. In other words, it increases. No, that isn't a good thing to do. Okay. What you are talking about is, look, guys, do you need this? What else happens when you see somebody else? You know, although he may not have the best of images in front of him, there are things that he is seeing. There are things that he talks about. There are things that are beyond addiction that seems to be around him, which are idolating. There are things that, you know, you need to discover him and you need to allow him to discover himself beyond what he does. Come on, not every time the same thing. What else do you do otherwise when you're not addicted? And how did you get addicted? So how did you get addicted comes at a much, much later stage. What is it when addiction is not there that you could possibly do? What is it that you probably, is there sometimes a comparison that comes around with someone else who is not exactly like you? What else do you want to do? You know, you're watching that sport. Would you like to become one of them? You know, AFL, something or the other that he's watching. Football, rugby he's watching. Sit down with him. What's inspiring? He's, you know, he's clapping away. Right. That's a cue.
I think I understand that. Yeah.
Yes. Get him to move that. There is a hero that he's worshiping when he's watching something else. Get him and see if there's an opportunity for the hero and this particular person to meet. Would you like to see him? I know him. Take him over. Wow.
It's almost as though like what's aspirational for this person?
Absolutely.
And is there a version of this person who doesn't need this behavior?
Absolutely.
Or doesn't need this?
Yes.
Yeah.
The chances are when you start looking at the discounted behaviors more, then you can't account for aspirational behaviors. So you get paid for working with the discounted behaviors. You convert that into payment towards, a challenging payment towards accounting for the future. I want to get rid of this client from my book so that I can have the next one. I want to get rid of myself from social work so that I can move somewhere else and do something else. You know, social workers, psychologists, we always need, but we can invent and reinvent ourselves in some other place. Not hold on. There is a tendency for us to hold on to a client group, and that comes out of our own compulsions of insecurity. I have moved out from various things, you know, and I've done that over a period of time, and I can move and stretch into something else as I have moved out from this sort of teaching and training to something into organizational change. And I work with in unimaginable conditions, I use social work techniques working elsewhere. I work with some of the CEOs, the brightest of them, in private companies. And I try to wonder why they've chosen me. Well, I bring them that social science framework that humanistic framework, that welfare framework, which possibly has been absent in their life. So that makes a huge difference at the end of the day in terms of what is it that we would probably be needing to do as far as the future is concerned. All right, we'll leave at that. Kristen, you can always ring me
Perfect.
up and
I'm
we
one of
can
the
have,
folks
yeah,
who
sure.
needs to go at 10. So thank you for pausing early, so I got a
Wonderful,
chance to
wonderful,
ask.
wonderful. Yeah. Anyone else?
Dr. Puller,
Yes, Daniela.
I'm interested in how or what elements of strengths-based work or concepts you would bring into brief client work where you've only got a short time to work with someone.
Yeah. Now, it depends upon what that brief client work that you're talking about. If the brief client work is already defined by, you see, there are some compulsions in our life. One of the compulsions in our life seems to be Medicare rebates and Medicare clients and 10 clients and 5 clients, 5 sessions only, 3 sessions only kind of orientation that we have got. If knowing that timing is going to be a restriction, still within that timing, if you allow for a freelancing, it would work for you. Our paranoia is about how do I work with him in a brief manner. My idea would be something different. Hey, we got 3 hours. Yeah, you know that? Yeah, we just got 3 hours, 3 sessions. Come, what do we do? What's the best thing that we can do? How do you want this to? So you move out of the stereotypical notion and automatically move into the other. And when you labor in a new area, uncharted area, then when it comes down to, when it becomes heavy, my God, I've touched something new, I can't handle it, then you start writing it back again into your brief notes or whatever that you're trying to do. It's a challenge for us. The challenge is in terms of this, your focus has been on the presenting problem. My focus is on the unpresented problem, unrepresented future. So if you start with the future, I know presenting problem exists. In many of my, when I was dealing with some of these issues in Bosnia, particularly in child protection examples, I was telling them at that time that, when one lady was talking to me in the context, I asked her, when was it that you guys ever went to Dream World? It was almost like a family, something like Dream World. She said, oh, when Alice was around. I didn't bother to check immediately who Alice was around. It entered into my notes, into my mind, that when Alice was around, left it there. That means Alice is not present now. That means there's a deficit. Why bother? Leave it. So in my future plans, I'll have to be thinking, guys, I can't bring Alice. Alice was a grandmother. She's dead, gone. But I need to think in terms of what is it that from the system in child protection that I could offer her as a service that would help her to reconstruct that particular element. Oh, Alfred has not always been like this. I think it's his children that have come around, and my own children and my own stepchildren, all of them we just couldn't handle. So he's become very erratic, and therefore all of this has happened. So I've got 3 different informations there. What did I get information? She's got, this is my first entry into the whole thing. I can't sit down and ask her, come on, let us go and do your genogram right now. Who is who? You're talking about brief situation. This is a brief situation. She gave me 3 informations. 1, she's got an ex-partner with whom she's got children. She has her own children from another ex. She's got this Alfred. His children came over. Now there's a little bit of tussle around. So, okay. So what are you looking at? Are you all planning to go for a picnic? Just change of topic, change of scene. Looks ridiculous. It is ridiculous questions which will make somebody think out of the box. Give them the opportunity to be creative. Give them the opportunity to construct. And when they are constructing, help with your expertise and co-construct that. And that's when some of those things can basically come through. It isn't very, Daniela, I know you are, you are a therapist, and you and I would obviously need a little more than what we are talking about. It's not that easy. But when I deal with people, when I have a 1.5 day training program with people like you, obviously they bring up their situations and then we tease them. In an hour and a half, we wouldn't be able to do it. But this is just basically a notional kind of to give you a notional understanding that it all starts with what we pride ourselves with our active listening skills. We pride ourselves with our reflectivity. We pride ourselves with our critical reflections. And we talk about all of those things. But how far are we taking this into a futuristic thing? And where are we leading our clients? Is the client leading us? And can we follow him? No, we haven't given him that opportunity for him to lead us. We are actually leading him somewhere because we have a wherewithal, which is just about that much. And we've got solutions we got to give. So that's a little bit of an introspective view. It is not to deride what we are doing. It's one of those things that we can add this to the repertoire of our skills and can be better. So that's all that I would probably be wanting to, say. I'm quite happy to send the article away. And of course, you can download all the entire book as well as the article. Gives you a little more. It's been, let me tell you, it's 30,000 times or more it has been downloaded. So it does have some basic sense in it, and it does work. Anyone else has any particular question?
Good morning, doctor. This is me, Aishwarya.
Yes, Aishwarya.
I'm sorry I got into this webinar late, so I don't know if you have spoken about these points. But if you want to practice a strength-based approach, what values or what skills or what should be the mindset or of the worker to to practice a strength-based approach?
Yeah. In very simple terms, you got to ask yourself one question: are you a person who like to see a lot of positive development in the other people, and you yourself are positive about how things are going with you, and you can work on them? And then the other thing, of course, would be an unconditional ability to accept the client with his situation, and that the client obviously has not only a problem, but he also understands that there is a solution, but somehow that solution isn't in his ambit at this point of time because he's a bit blinded at this point of time, and therefore he can't see it. But if you have an opportunity to creatively move him, he is quite ready to take, and he will fly. That should be the attitude, I would say. A kind of an attitude which doesn't stereotypically put him into a bag, although the bag is something which has given you the job. You are in child protection, so obviously then children safety is an important issue, and that's where they come from. So that's a bag, you know, it's statutory protection. But still it is possible. All you have done is put a label on him. All you have done is brought him into as a guardian of the state, you know, took him into care. But otherwise, he still is a human being. So that citizenship factor, that human rights factor, that the factor to understand that this client is a being is an important thing that you need to add into your repertoire.
Thank you.
No worries. Yes, Jomana. Oh, yes, and Palab.
Good morning, Dr. Venkat.
Okay, whoever has gone first. Okay, yeah, sure.
Sorry. So I'm currently on placement with Department of Children, Child Safety, Townsville South and Vertigan team. And I've seen a lot of relevance of strength-based practice and solution-focused practice in this field. And like we have a lot of clients who have like domestic violence in the family. And I've noticed how like the whole entire perception towards domestic violence, that it should be based on the perpetrator's pattern of behavior rather than just like focusing on like the survivor. And also one like unique thing I've noticed, like we refer to the victims as survivor and not as a victim. So we are technically using our strength-based lens when we're referring to them.
Sure.
So yeah, that was pretty like I would say engaging for me to know about that. Also, I was wondering, like, whenever there's DV involved, like whenever there's DV involved in the particular relationship or a family, I've noticed like even though the relationship is pretty toxic and there's a lot of violence, both physical and verbal, but sometimes in some instances the partner like still wants to be with that person. So my question to you is like, how do I, like, if I'm talking about a couple, like there's a lot of physical and verbal abuse, but then the wife still wants to be with like her husband, but then that just puts the whole like her children into risk. So which is why we have a child protection order on that family. So if I as a social worker have to like engage with that person, the wife, so how am I going to like talk with her and like with the strength-based, of course, strength-based approach, and like without offending her emotions and sort of like providing her my support that I'm with her and I'm like not against her. Because once you visit your clients from child safety, they just like, no, I hate you guys. Like there's a lot of negative scrutiny and like a very bad image about child safety because of the department's past history about like engaging in like stolen generation and everything.
I understand that.
So, yeah.
One of the things that happens with you know, wherever we have intersections of this nature, gender, domestic violence, child protection, all of these intersections that come about, and then further about not just gender, LGBT families too, or single parent families. And this notion that most of the time it's women that get battered, true, but there could also be situations where a man has been emotionally abused to such an extent and his voice has never been heard. So there are situations like that too. Domestic violence by default has also been separating social workers who take that particular perspective of one survivor, which is, you know, gender-based surviving, for instance, you know, some who prefer, look, it's most often it is women who get battered. True, the data is that, but there are also men who need to be worked with. If the attitude is that in our society, that we will only work with one segment of our society and the other segment is not to be worked with, and you have the other attitude or organizational philosophy that works on attachment theory, child protection, the entire principle in child protection is attachment theory or broken attachments. And the same theory, of course, we move on, take it up to other attachments as well, the addictions and everything else. So you've got, that is not an easy area. But as you said, the language has shifted from a victim to a survivor. That's one aspect of it. But still, if you continue to be bureaucratic in treatment, it's only the word that you have changed. You call them survivors, but treat them as victims. So it wouldn't make much of a difference in your language unless you say so. I demonstrate, I can't demonstrate, how well your practice be noted from child. In child protection, it all depends upon how you practice and what opportunities you have to practice strength-based perspectives. I remember demonstrating in training to police as well as senior child protection officers that when I entered into DV kind of situations, and we were picking up the kids, and at the same time the whole thing was a big mess. There's completely the entire eye. It's not damaged, but there's a lot of bruising and everything else. There's drugs around, there's too many beer bottles, and there are children there, dogs, cats, and everything else. And I still went around the man and woman. Didn't put the hand on them yet, because some people said, if you do that, and if there is something else with which he's going to beat you, I said, no. I just said, I'm sorry, I had to come to do this. In better times, maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday, we'll talk about it. For the next 2 days, the kids will not be hungry. They will have a meal. They'll be looked after. We'll meet on Monday. Just 3 lines of my speech. It's not the policeman's speech. It's not that afraid, panic-stricken young social worker who's gone in there along with the policeman and then immediately saying, have we heard about it? He'll come to the court, we'll talk about it. No, none of those things. Just that little speech. It's the way you will work out. You got to meditate what you're going to talk about. You got to think about what you're going to talk about in a situation of that nature. Prepare your speech. Be ready. You are definitely going to do that. On Monday morning, when we went to the court, there were these very people, very nicely dressed. They were not skimpily dressed. They were not drunk. They had their hair properly done. They came over. Of course, they could still see the bruises and everything else. And they just said, hello. Not a big smile. They can't have a smile. Their children is, coming into the court. We decided we're going to take them into care. I know the drill. I'll do that. What I need to do that in the child protection interest, I'll do it. But then again, I went back to them. Guys, you knew this will happen. But let's say we'll meet on Wednesday. We'll talk about a few things. Comes the family meeting. In the family meeting, don't tell them this is the day on which I have taken over. His order is for the next so many months. Think about when would you like to get the child back? What is it that you are prepared to do? Work with them, those opportunities for you to work with them. Get the system around. Figure out what Daniela can do. Figure out what, Jomana can do. Anybody else who was in this particular place. What could anybody else do? What are the other services? The synchronicity of our services, The coordination of services are needed when crisis is there. You don't take the children away, take them away, you took them away, and then on Friday afternoon, you go for your beer, and then thank God till Monday, nothing for you to worry. You are stressed out and you freaked out. That's the end of the story. There's a lot of responsibility. I think strength-based practice is a philosophy that tells us and reminds us that we probably are not doing certain things in the idea, all those ideas to coincide and be prepared. We ask about parenting, training to be given to these parents because they couldn't look after these children. Triple parenting training or something or the other. Until they do the training, we won't give the children back. But the damn training is not available to them from tomorrow for them to do. And then we say, clean up all this mess and give, show some remorse when the kids can come back. The Centrelink cuts off the money. They can't buy toys when the children come back. So what happens is, it's like a series of things happen. One thing drastic happens. It is a series that we need to be bridging. Seriously, we need to think about child protection. Wow, lovely, effective. What is that theory that we talk about? Attachment theory. Wonderful. What does it mean? It wants parents to stay together. However lousy those relationships are, however bad and violent they have always been, there is a parent who loves her children. There is a dad who loves his children. So it's those relationships. We talk about child's best interest and take them away. Did we ask the children? I know they've gone through trauma. They are traumatized. But in the learned helplessness in which they are all living together, you need to pay some attention to that. You need to look at the strength of that particular family. I would rather support a family to slowly peel off the domestic violence, if it can be done, and help everybody to remain in that place, monitor each other, put some supports, and do something, rather than cut off, work through this person, send them, temporary refuge, respite is okay. But don't, cut those things. It's might be a conservative way of doing things. But strength-based practice obviously is looking at the way in which we can reconstruct, co-construct, and help people. Even the most deviant person can be brought back, at least not all the steps, towards a few steps. So, I'm sure, an hour and a half of our discussion wouldn't help. Let's see, there are many opportunities. Look around, read something, reflect on it. You are all on the right track. And I'll take one more question, I think in another 5 minutes, and then we will wind up for the day.
Thank you, Dr. Venkit.
No worries. Yes, Jomana, you had, yes. I can't hear you. Can't hear you.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you apply a strength-based approach when you work with people with disabilities in remote communities? So let's say 5 hours or 10 hours away. And will it be disempowering for the client if you get them into services like Centrelink and DIS, considering that services are limited in communities, in remote communities?
Yeah, Jomana, I understand that, as an international, person, and you're also reflecting on what our communities are. Yes, it's a challenge. We have what is called remote rural services, and they are generally, sometime or the other, a bus of allied health specialists go around or take a plane and go around to a remote rural area. finish up the entire diagnosis, and after 6 months later, they all go there and to, put labels and give them some services. It's unfortunate. It costs a lot of money to run a remote rural service. Having said that, not everything, not everywhere strength-based practice would be in a way possible, but that does not mean we diminish that. We minimize that. What we have to understand is it's the approach. It's a philosophy around. And when you go, yes, as you said, 5 hours, you go there. And most of the time that there is this gentleman or a gentle lady who is in the community. So empower the community, create the understanding as to what services, what this particular person needs. Most often, even in Kanamala and other places where I used to see Aboriginal children, and I stopped taking Aboriginal children into the department, and I just said, stop it. I saw a child who probably didn't have, he had this, the nose was dripping through, and he didn't have even a nappy was in a very bad way, and he was just roaming around left, right, and center. And some people offered to me, I said, look, that child is neglected. I said, yeah, he is. What are your suggestions? You expect me to take him? I said, no, he's in the community. He's being looked after. Somebody or the other will look after. There's a grandmother. He's like a village kid. Someone will look after. It's not such a huge issue. But if it becomes consistent, becomes on a permanent feature, then you'll have to think about what is it that you need to do. You probably need to give better drainage in that particular place, better sanitation in that particular place, better housing, better facilities. So that's the way a community developmental orientation starts coming in. With the disability too, one person or two persons in a remote rural area with disability is, even in Australia, has always been seen as a person who will be looked after by the whole village. So they have an understanding. They know how he communicates. He uses the same word, but they communicate it in a particular way. And so they protect him. So protection is there. Care is there. What you probably need to see is, what is that so specialized that you are taking there? Is it his role is being not valorized? Is it social role valorization? Is it person-centered practice? What is it that they are trying to reduce? Is it just probably increase his movement in the community, a wheelchair mobility that will help? You got to look at it from that point of view. If it's intellectual disability, challenging. Certainly you need to get the parents a little more education around how to deal with it. So you got to be there. And some issues are real. Not everywhere you can do it. But the overarching goal is to understand this philosophy and make ourselves vibrate a shade better. Thank you. All right, if there are, we've got a couple of more minutes. I'll just look at the chats. Okay, okay.
I just wanted to comment that in drug and alcohol sector, we commonly use motivational interviewing.
Yes.
And it's very similar to based on strength-based practice.
Absolutely.
And that miracle question, especially.
Absolutely. Motivational interviewing, when it started off, it's Michael Clark, my very good friend. If you put Venkat Pula and Michael Clark together, you would find a hell of a lot of motivational interviewing videos which are available, and I can also send you some. They are
perfect.
They are available on my website, www. Strength-based practices website.
Okay.
Michael Clark, his organization is called Build Motivation from United States. Michael has written this book along with me on strength-based practices. You will find his articles too there. And it is exactly the same, appreciative inquiry, setting up the dream, figuring out the resources, designing that, and finally delivering it. So these are just normative kind of things that all that we are trying to do is treat and give the client. In fact, the language we're never going to use is, never going to call him a client. Of course, when we say don't call him a client, they said call him a consumer. Even that's much worse. Let it be client of whatever it is. But then, one day, it's just people. We are all in people helping professions. Somebody in need. All of us are in need too at this point of time. In COVID-19, how many of us can put a heart here, hand on here and say, look, I'm not, I'm 100% well. No. We all have mental health issues at this point of time, living with a certain level of comorbidity, including our premiers and prime ministers and everybody else, because they don't know. We're living with anxiety. But we seems to be minimizing and then boldly going up to deal with somebody else's activity. That's what it is all about. Many social workers, many psychologists try and tell me that I came to this profession because I wanted to understand myself. I had all these problems. So therefore, I thought one way of doing it would be to go there and start working with some other people. By the same token, there are other people who have gone through hell, don't want to go there. They say, that's not my cup of tea anymore because my childhood has been spoiled with all of that. So I don't wish to. So some can overcome, some can't, but they will also overcome over a period of time. That's all I can say. So I would kind of thank you all for coming in at this point of time into this program. And it's just a preliminary, and I felt quite happy to do this with, so many students coming from different backgrounds attending this. And they are from both Monash as well as also James Cook and a few people from other places. And thank you very much. And thank you, Perita, for staying through. It was very nice to see you and Daniela and several of you who have asked the questions. And
Thank
others.
you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.